Professionally, I'm a writer, editor, and marketing communications professional. 6 years ago, I started my business, JSD Writes LLC. In addition to that, I'm also the vice president of the Beacon Hill McFeeders Community Council, which is our neighborhood association. And I've been in that role about 7 years, serving with Dee Evans, who is our president. So that's kind of me in a nutshell in this current place and time.
Okay, that's wonderful. So we are interviewing you because you are a resident of Beacon Hill. What makes that special?
Because it's always been a special neighborhood. And having grown up there, I'm biased, but throughout all of the changes and the challenges, the neighborhood still stands. It's a beautiful place.
It's amazing. That's amazing. How long have you and your family lived in Beacon Hill?
Well, I was born into it because my parents moved there in the early 50s.
Oh, wow.
So by the time I came along, they were established residents of the neighborhood. So aside from the years that I did move to different areas of Kansas City, I consider myself a lifelong Beacon Hill resident.
That's awesome. Where did they come from? Where did you guys move from? Where are your parents?
My parents came from East Texas,
Okay.
Specifically a small town called Henderson, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about 120 miles, 135 miles from Dallas, 20 miles from Tyler, Texas.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So it's just, we're not too far from Patrick Mahomes' hometown of White House, Texas.
Well, you guys both chose to come to a wonderful city, so.
Yes.
What made them want to live in Beacon Hill, do you know? Move to that area?
Well, it goes back to when they decided to come to Kansas City.
Mm.
After World War II, after my father got out of the Army, his brother-in-law and sister were already living here.
Mm.
They had an apartment building. They owned an apartment building on 27th and Park. It would have sat right across from where East Patrol is. It would have been like directly across the street.
Mm-hmm.
And so my parents did not want to return to the South. And Uncle Jim and Aunt Doris talked them into giving Kansas City a try. And my father had served in the Army with some people from Kansas City. His best friend was living in Kansas City. So he knew in coming here that there were going to be family and friends already here to kind of help them get established. And the neat thing about the apartment building my Uncle Jim and Aunt Doris owned was that all the tenants who lived there were family. People who came from Texas, because that's where everybody mostly came from. They looked up, Uncle Jim and Aunt Doris, and at some point in time ended up living in an apartment in that building until they were able to get on their feet.
Wow.
And then my parents paid it forward. When they got their house, our house used to have a second address because it's a 2-story, and it was an apartment. And so what they did was when my uncle, my mom's brother, when he got out of the Army, and they talked him into coming to Kansas City, and he rented the upstairs part of the house.
Wow.
And then when he got married, he and his wife lived there until they were able to buy their home, and move out. I can think of right now 3 families who lived in our house. Most were family, but there was one two families that were not related to us, but they were good friends. And my parents gave them a place to stay when they needed it. When they were young parents or young married couples trying to get established. So I thought that was always a cool story of paying it forward and looking out. Because people don't do that now.
It's true. It's very rare. That's amazing that your parents did that. That you got to grow up seeing them doing that. What was it like growing up in Beacon Hill?
It was actually pretty fun because there were a lot of kids.
Oh, awesome.
And there were kids of all, there were teenagers and little ones and kids of there was not a shortage of kids in the neighborhood. And there were several kids that we were of the same age, so we hung out. But my parents kind of had this thing about, and I would like this as a parent with my son growing up. I didn't want you hanging out with older kids, but I didn't want you, hanging out with the babies either. So the fact that they kind of pushed me to hang out with kids my own age, because of common interests also. So I was kind of pulled in that direction. So, because even for me growing up as an only child, I still have plenty of people to hang out with.
That's awesome. I never thought about that. I'm a middle child myself, and so I typically either hung out with my older sister's friends or my younger sister's friends. I have friends of my own, of course, but we all were. But I think in some ways it prompted me to grow up a little too fast, And so that's interesting. What are some of your favorite memories growing up in Beacon Hill?
Riding my bike through the neighborhood.
Oh, yes.
That is the fondest memory I have because Beacon Hill has always been a walkable neighborhood. And, if we weren't walking, we were on our bikes all the time. And, it was a thing where, my friend and I, my very best friend, she lived up the street from me. She lives in Dallas, Texas now, but back then we were always on our bikes and we always knew that we had to be home by dark. Because if not, my mother would stand at the corner of Lake and Paseo and she would be looking out. So we knew we had to beat it home, but we had plenty of fun in the meantime. And West Paseo, the street, was always a very scenic street. I attended church on that street. My other best friend and her family lived on that street. So we'd always ride our bikes up there and hang out. And you could always kind of look and see kind of toward downtown, from that location. And again, it's a beautiful block. It really is.
That's awesome. What are some memories that you have that are not as comforting?
When the neighborhood started to change, because I came of age in the 70s, and that's when the neighborhood started to change. We saw the white flight part of it was at the tail end of that. But we started to see a crime element. We had a bad prostitution problem in our neighborhood. And we didn't so much have the crack problem of the 80s, where a lot of neighborhoods had problems with drug houses. We had problems with prostitution. There was a house of ill repute right around the corner from where I lived. It was nothing to see women standing out on the corner. I'd be riding with my parents, and here's a person trying to flag down my dad. I felt some kind of way about that. What was particularly striking to me was when I was in high school. I went to Catholic high school. So my same friend, Lori, and I we both attended the same high school, and we would have to walk to the bus stop. We walked to the Metro bus stop, caught the Truce bus to school. And there was not a day that went by that we were either walking to the bus stop or from the bus stop that there weren't cars of men pulling up, driving by you slowly. It angered me more than it creeped me out. Because I felt like, what if this was your daughter? How would you feel if someone was doing this to your daughter? We're somebody's daughters out here, and we're just trying to go about our business.
Right.
But thank God to the efforts of the neighborhood, and they're in their partnership with the police department, finally got rid of that problem. But it was a scourge for about 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. I think we had 2 pimps living in the neighborhood that I was aware of. Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You said you went to Catholic school. Was that a part of the Kansas City School District, or was that a private school?
No, I went to Kansas City Public Schools up through grade 8.
Okay.
And then I went to Lillis High School, as it was known at the time. The school where I went to, the current location you would be familiar with, is De La Salle at 37th and Troost.
Okay.
Well, Lillis was located at 37th and Forest. So the building directly behind the current De La Salle building was the old Lillis High School. And I attended there from freshman to junior year. And at the end of my junior year, the school closed. Otherwise, I would have graduated from there.
Right.
Put you in the mind of the current Cristo Rey in terms of diversity.
Okay.
We have black kids, Hispanic kids from the west side, fed Lillis. So it was mainly a black, Hispanic, and Caucasian student body. And everybody got along. And we still do to this day.
That's good.
We're still in close contact. I ended up graduating from O'Hara High School. Had to go there my senior year. So I went from being in a school that was very diverse to basically desegregating O'Hara. There were I think there were 2 black students in that whole school.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah.
How was that experience?
For me, it was an adjustment only because I was a senior.
Okay.
I did not like, getting to know people all over again and all that. I'd always been around people of diverse backgrounds, so that didn't bother me. It bothered me that it bothered them, the other students, because a lot of them really hadn't been around people who didn't look like them. And it showed in the way some of them communicated or said things that just indicated of what I now know that I would call a racial blind spot.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does make sense. Alrighty. So after high school, where did you start working?
After high school, I went to Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas.
Okay.
Spent about a semester and a half there. Did the total freshman flame out. I'm gonna be honest, just first time away from home, from protective parents, and I went a little crazy. But I came back home, enrolled in Penn Valley, and I had taken classes at Penn Valley before, so I was very familiar with it.
Through high school? Okay.
And also got a job. I got a job at the Kansas City Star, working in the circulation department. So I was a person that, like, if people missed their newspaper delivery, they didn't get their paper, they'd call in the customer service. And so what ended up happening while I was going to school, the work hours, we worked 4 10-hour days. So it didn't always jive with my school schedule. So, from the start, then I went to working in banking, and just some of the hours, it was kind of fits and starts in terms of school. Took a job with one employer where that kind of evened itself out. And so I, returned to Penn Valley, and then finished up and then went on and completed my bachelor's degree at Park University. So I got fortunate enough to work for an employer who was very supportive of me going to school, and the company had a 100% tuition reimbursement program. So I took full advantage of that benefit. So what I did was, even though I borrowed a little money to go to school, so what I would do, I would pay my tuition, and then get my grades and everything. And so then I would submit, because you had to have a B average to get reimbursed. So I submitted my grades, got my reimbursement money, and then turned around and paid for my next semester classes. So that's how I managed that. And then toward the end, I had to borrow a little money, but yeah, that's how that worked out. And then as soon as I got my degree, 3 months after I graduated college, I left that company.
Okay. So
because I was a small child. I had a small child at the time. My son was like 3. And, they were like, well, if you want to do communications, you're going to have to move to New York. Because that's where the company headquarters.
Right.
And I'm like, I can't move to New York. So, I took another job.
Right. What job was that?
I took a job with Hallmark Cards.
Okay.
I ended up working in Lawrence, Kansas. They have a manufacturing plant in Lawrence. So I went from working in an office to all of a sudden working in a manufacturing environment where there are, people driving forklifts and assembly lines. My mother had been used to that environment because she ended up working in a factory environment, but for me, not so much. So, that was another growing and learning experience. But I just still found it really wasn't what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I was grateful for the experience, but it wasn't what I wanted to do because I had a degree in communications, and I was trying to I wanted a job where I could use my training. So.
And you're a business owner now.
I am.
Yes. How did you, from working kind of in communications to working at a plant to owning your own business, what was that process like?
It was a long one. I would say that college does not prepare us to be business owners. And so I am grateful for the years that I spent working for those companies because I learned, well, you think, well, this is how I would do it if I was in charge. But again, I took it as a learning experience in terms of processes and procedures, and even how to better do my job as a communications professional. But one thing, the trigger for me was losing my mom. Because I would always complain to mom about work and how things are not, I want to move to another level, and I like what I do, but I want to advance, and I just don't feel like that opportunity is there for me. And she'd sit and she'd listen, and the one thing that moved me was when she says, so what are you gonna do about it? And that was the trigger right there, because I didn't take immediate action, but it was the things she said that wouldn't leave my mind. I'm like, I know I'm not where I want to be. I know I'm not happy with this, but how am I going to make this happen? And once I lost her, those words came back to me. And I thought, you know what? What do I have to lose? And I was having a conversation with a colleague, and this person, knew how I felt. And his final question to me was, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "You know what you need to do. Why are you still here?"
Right.
And I processed that information along with what my mom had told me, and I thought, it's time to go. And I stepped out on faith. I gave my 2 weeks notice, and people are like, "Where are you going to work?" "I'm going to the house. I'm going to the home office."
Right.
And that was 6.5 years ago.
Wow, that's amazing.
I can't say it wasn't scary, because it was. Because you wake up and like, what the heck did I just do? But...
How old was your son at that point?
He's grown.
Okay. So
I didn't want to really do anything either while he was still in school. That was another part of it. So...
Okay. So, what was it like being African American in Kansas City, growing up, also raising your son?
Well, I came up in the generation right after the civil rights movement. So I'm a child of the 70s. I came of age in the 70s. Where I think in my parents' view, they saw, I don't think they ever had the notion that we were past the struggle, but that, okay, we can breathe for a minute. Our kids can breathe for a minute. Because during that time, we saw, moving in the black community, black folks were moving to the suburbs. Folks were out in South Kansas City, the Northland, right now, Lee Summit, we're in Blue Spring, we're all over the place. And so that kind of opened it up more. So I didn't, and I think that the racism that my parents experienced, I experienced it in a more subtle way. Whereas in the South it was blatant. And even them coming up here in Missouri in the 50s, in the late 40s, you had whites only, coloreds only, being told where they could live, boundaries. So that's why when it opened up that black people could move south of 27th Street, that's when my parents looked at buying a house. And so that's how that all came about. But that wasn't particularly my struggle. My struggle was dealing with the kids at O'Hara at that time. And it was really the first time that I had, just really, I didn't come out and hear the N-word, but you just felt the vibe. I had always been, my parents had always made sure, like I was in scouting, I was in junior achievement when I was in high school, and I was in church stuff, like church camp, and so it put me being always around people who were different from me, background, race, all that, economic background. So it didn't trip me out, and I think I think they did that intentionally, because they wanted me to be comfortable with whoever I was around. It didn't matter. They wanted me to know who I was. It's not my job to make you comfortable. I'm comfortable within myself. I can't help who I am. I did not make myself. And this is who I am. So, again, to answer your question, growing up, it was a different, I think we almost felt like we had slightly arrived a little bit, but I think that bias and that racism, it was a thing that started to hover below the surface, rather than being blatant.
Okay. And your family is from the South. And so, moving to Kansas City, did the civil rights movement kind of influenced that decision to move most of your family here? Or do you know if that was...
I think they wanted, yes.
Mm-hmm.
My mother never had a desire to move back to the South.
Mm-hmm.
Because the family house, that land is still in our family.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was several years before Mom got sick. I said, Mom, I said, you're always, putting resources into the farm
Mm-hmm.
and, spend a lot of time, energy, and money there. I said, why don't we just pack up and move there? And the look on her face,
Mm-hmm.
she said, no.
Wow.
No, absolutely not. But it was a look on her face that struck me.
What was the look? Was it
The
fear?
look was like, I'm not going back there.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever happened to her
Mm-hmm.
and the family during all those years, she didn't want to go back.
Even with having land.
She's like, yeah, not to live. Absolutely not.
Wow.
Because there was some, and I really wish I had really gotten a chance to question her more
Mm-hmm.
about her experience. But I think some of the things that she and her siblings experienced, and my father and his siblings, I don't think they really wanted to go there.
Mm-hmm.
I think this represented a fresh start.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And by the looks of, or hearing you talk about your childhood, it very much feels like that's what they did.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's awesome. So, tell me about major institutions in your neighborhood. Beacon Hill.
I would say the institution that I really miss in the neighborhood is the Wonder Bread Bakery.
Oh, yes.
Because you could smell the smell of bread wafting through the neighborhood. It's just like, if you think about gates,
Mm-hmm.
and you go to Midtown, 12th Street, or wherever there's a gate,
Mm-hmm.
the smell of barbecue's in the air.
Mm-hmm.
But with Wonder Bread, it was the smell of bread, and it was delightful.
Mm.
And once, Wonder Bread moved out and the building sat vacant for many years, we wondered what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that we now have residential and retail in there,
Mm-hmm.
it's just an exciting thing.
That is exciting.
And the fact that they preserved some of the stuff from the bakery in that building is really cool.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
What else did they preserve on Beacon Hill?
I am trying to think. I know the bakery is the biggest thing. The view from up there is, it's beautiful.
Wow, I've never paid attention. I go to Refugees all the time.
Mm-hmm. The view from atop the Wonder Bread Lofts it's amazing. They have events and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. I went to it was the soft opening for Homeroom Health. And they had that event on the roof of Wonder Bread Lofts, and it was magnificent. Most of the things that were around when I was a kid in the neighborhood are no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that one building is the thing.
Wow.
Because the Safeway grocery store, that used to be where the church. What is that? Because they own a lot of that land around there. But that land where the Church of the Nazarene, that was like Safeway grocery store. Right in that location.
To the south of it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That was a grocery store. We have Rhythm Lane, the skating rink that my parents wouldn't let me go to. Because they thought, the older kids. But it was kids in my age group that went there, but my parents were like, you're not going up there.
Yeah, no.
And I'll have to hear about everybody's adventures, the next day of school.
Oh, yeah.
But, and the businesses along the Truce Corridor.
Mm-hmm.
My father's best friend, Edward Wortham, owned a barber shop along, he was at 23rd, 24th and Troost. For years, there were, small businesses, entrepreneurs, barbershops, beauty shops, that sort of thing. There was a gas stations and all that stuff just kind of went away.
Interesting. Do you think that is a product of gentrification?
I think it was part of buildings that fell in, it was blight. You know, because as businesses moved out, well, no new businesses moved in. And so whoever owned the buildings, they didn't really do anything to them, and a lot of things fell into a state of disrepair. But that was not the case throughout the whole neighborhood. The whole neighborhood was not blighted. It was just the part that's been redeveloped had fallen into serious blight.
Interesting, and it's different now because more businesses are coming back. Will
Yes.
likely be deemed.
Yes.
Right. Interesting. That was interesting.
I think the redevelopment of Beacon Hill kind of juxtaposed with downtown development. And because we're just due south of downtown, you know, our neighborhood was kind of swept up in that planning for redevelopment. Because the plan that was sold to my mother and some of our neighborhood elders, some are still with us, but most are not. But they were the ones whom the developers pitched the Beacon Hill redevelopment plan to. You know, and it was pitched as a mixed income, you know, kind of diverse in terms of housing stock and all that. So if I had been sitting at the table at the time that was proposed, I'd have been like, this is fantastic. Our neighborhood needs a facelift. And nobody disagreed with that, you know, at the time. So the whole point was to get rid of the blight, not to get rid of the people, I believe.
Okay. How have you seen history repeating itself in your neighborhood?
I don't think history has repeated itself. It's just kind of, as my mother told me this too. My mother was a very wise woman, but she told me this when all the redevelopment and everything. She said to me, she said, "This is going to turn because as we've seen, you know, the white flight in the neighborhood." She said they're going to come back. And she goes, now you can do whatever, because she put it in writing, you can do whatever you want with this house. But she said, if you sell it, once you leave this neighborhood, you won't be able to afford to get back in. You will effectively be priced out. And when I first heard that from her, it struck me. But as I moved back in the neighborhood, for one, and I happened at one time in my working career to work for one of the developers of the Beacon Hill project. So through that work, I got a lot more insight into what pricing was going to be. And I thought to myself, my mother was right. You know, I better, you know, hold on to what we've got, you know, for as long as possible. You know, because I can't afford to come in there and purchase a $500,000 house. I better have some serious land if I'm putting out that kind of money.
Yes. Yep.
So.
That's very true. Well, thank you so much for your time. Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I don't.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Okay, I came in late, so I missed some things. So you went to O'Hara? Okay, my son went there. He graduated in '89.
I graduated in '80. I was one of the kids who came from Lillis High School.
Lillis.
Yep.
Okay, so you probably don't know. Another thing, I always get tickled when people say it opened up and Black people could finally live south of 27th Street. Because I'm old and I'm the third generation that was born in my neighborhood on 55th Street. So there are Black folks out of 27th Street for a long time. And I've even had like discussions with sociology professors. They're like, you can't keep teaching people that. Because Kansas City did have a couple of large Black communities. Ours, the 54th Street neighborhood.
And the Leeds neighborhood.
And the Leeds neighborhood. So Black folks were scattered around. So what business did you go into?
I'm basically a consultant. I work from home. I'm a writer and editor.
Oh,
I've been working with Ruth Ramsey for the past 15 years on her magazine, Our Health Matters. And-
that's what
yeah.
I do.
Nice.
Yeah, that's
I
what I
en-
do when I'm not here.
I enjoy it.
Yeah,
I enjoy it.
yeah, I'm working with Reverend Harold Todd now. He's been doing a book by the late Reverend Don Ford.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
So
Yes.
it's like, oh, okay, you do know I have a job now, right? But, what was your mother's name?
Juanita Dunn.
Juanita.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was from Yazoo, Mississippi.
Okay.
And he used to say, Mississippi's my home, but I ain't homesick. And when you said your mother wouldn't go back, that's like, that was my total experience.
Mm-hmm.
When you see what this guy wants. Okay. That was a great interview.
It was.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Carmen.
But I do have one more thing to add,
Oh,
is we have wonderful neighbors,
Okay.
our new and old residents. And so I think one thing that our newer neighbors are learning, because those of us who have lived in the neighborhood have known, you know, that we've had to fight and advocate for the things that we want for our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that our new neighbors are learning that, because I shared with a couple of them, I said, hey, welcome to the fight. Because we have to really be strong
Well, you have, this is
advocates for the things that we want for our neighborhoods. And we have to make sure that our voices are heard.
Yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.